In the heart of the lively village of Kanyama, life moved with a rhythm as vibrant as the bright colours that painted the houses and market stalls. The air was filled with the sweet aroma of roasted maize, the sound of merchants calling out their wares, and the laughter of children chasing each other through the dusty streets. People bustled about, bartering for spices, fabrics, and clay pots, while women balanced baskets of fruit on their heads with graceful ease. It was a village full of life and warmth, where everyone seemed to belong, everyone except Zalira. Zalira was a girl unlike any other in Kanyama. She was known not just for her delicate beauty, with her deep brown eyes and soft smile, but for the kindness that radiated from her very soul. She carried a warmth that seemed to soften even the harshest days, and though her life was filled with sorrow, she never let bitterness touch her heart. People admired her quiet strength, though many wondered how a girl who had endured so much could still hold on to hope. Her life had once been filled with happiness. Back when her father was alive, he loved her deeply, and she adored him more than anything. But when he died, her world shattered. Left in the care of her stepmother, Nolwazi, and her grandmother, Mbali, Zalira's life became one of endless suffering. Nolwazi saw Zalira as nothing more than a burden, a reminder of the man she had lost. She treated her like a servant, piling chores on her from dawn until dusk. Mbali, who should have offered wisdom and comfort, turned her back on the girl, believing that Zalira was a waste of food and space. Zalira scrubbed floors until her hands bled, fetched water under the blazing sun, and cooked meals she was barely allowed to taste. While other children played and laughed, she worked in silence. Yet, despite everything, she never allowed hatred to take root in her heart. She dreamed of a better life, clinging to the belief that one day the world would show her the same kindness she gave to it. She refused to believe her heart would always carry pain. She held on to hope, because sometimes hope was all she had. After Zalira's father passed away, her life changed in the worst way possible. The warmth and love she once knew disappeared, replaced by coldness and cruelty. Her stepmother, Nolwazi, who once pretended to care for her while her father was alive, quickly revealed her true nature. With him gone, Nolwazi saw no reason to hide her bitterness anymore. She treated Zalira like a servant, making her wake up before dawn and work until nightfall. Every day, Zalira scrubbed floors until her knees ached, carried heavy buckets of water from the river, and cooked meals that she wasn't allowed to eat. If she didn't work fast enough or made even the smallest mistake, Nolwazi would scold her harshly or leave her without food. Her grandmother Mbali was no better. Instead of offering Zalira comfort or protection, she watched the mistreatment in silence, and sometimes even joined in. She believed Zalira was nothing but a burden, an extra mouth to feed. To Mbali, the girl's presence only reminded her of the son she lost, and that reminder filled her with resentment. She would shake her head in disapproval whenever she saw Zalira resting for even a moment, and often encouraged Nolwazi to be stricter. "She needs to learn her place," Mbali would say coldly, as if Zalira wasn't family, as if she didn't deserve kindness. Zalira's life became a cycle of endless chores and cruel words. She had no friends, no joy, and no escape. The other children in the village played and laughed in the sun while she watched from afar, scrubbing the doorstep or collecting firewood. Her clothes were old and torn, and her once bright eyes seemed to dim a little more each day. But even as her body grew weaker, her spirit refused to break. Despite everything, Zalira held on to hope. She believed, deep in her heart, that life wouldn't always be this way. Every night, after the house fell quiet and the moonlight spilled through the small window in the corner where she slept on a mat, she would whisper to herself that things would get better. She dreamed of a future where she was free from Nolwazi's harsh orders, free from Mbali's cold stares, and free to live a life filled with happiness and love. She imagined a world where someone would look at her and see her worth, where she wouldn't be treated like a burden. When her body ached and her stomach growled with hunger, it was that hope that kept her going. She didn't know when or how things would change, but she believed they would. Her heart told her that kindness still existed somewhere in the world, and one day it would find her. One evening, After a long day of endless chores, Zalira overheard a conversation that made her heart stop. Nolwazi was speaking in hushed tones to a stranger, discussing a marriage arrangement. The name she heard sent chills down her spine. Bakari. Everyone in Kanyama knew of him. He was a man from a distant village, feared for his cold heart and violent ways. People whispered that his wealth was built on dark deeds, that anyone who crossed him disappeared without a trace. His name alone was enough to silence a room. He was a man no one dared to speak of too loudly, afraid he might somehow hear them. Zalira felt her chest tighten with fear. The thought of being given to such a man, living a life even worse than the one she had now, was too much to bear. When Nolwazi finally confirmed the arrangement, her voice was indifferent, as though she were trading an old goat instead of her stepdaughter. Zalira's heart shattered. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she begged Nolwazi to reconsider. She wasn't ready to leave her home, no matter how cruel it was, and certainly not to marry a man known for his violence and cruelty. "Please, stepmother," Zalira pleaded, her voice trembling. "I'll work harder. I'll do whatever you ask. Don't send me away. Don't make me marry him." But Nolwazi's eyes were cold and unfeeling. To her, Zalira was a burden she had carried for far too long, and this marriage was the perfect solution. Bakari had offered a handsome price for her, more than Nolwazi could have ever hoped for. She saw no reason to refuse. Mbali, sitting quietly in the corner, nodded in agreement. To her, this was a blessing. "It's time you stopped being a weight on this family," she said, her voice like ice. Zalira's heart ached with betrayal. How could they do this to her? How could they sell her off like an object to a man whose name was spoken only in whispers? Her tears, her begging, her fear, none of it mattered. Nolwazi didn't care. Mbali didn't care. No one cared. The next morning, Bakari's men arrived. They were tall, silent and cold, their expressions unreadable. They didn't speak as they waited for Nolwazi to hand Zalira over. Nolwazi didn't hesitate. She pushed Zalira forward without even a second glance. Zalira felt numb. Her legs shook as the men tied her hands lightly, more to prevent her from running than to hurt her. Her heart screamed for someone, anyone, to stop this. She looked around desperately, hoping for a miracle, but the villagers turned away. They didn't want to get involved. They were afraid of Bakari and his men. No one dared to speak. Even those who had once admired her kindness wouldn't meet her eyes. As they led her away, Zalira felt like her soul was being ripped apart. Each step took her farther from the only home she had ever known. Her tears blurred her vision, but she didn't fight. What was the point? Nolwazi had made her decision. To them, she was nothing more than a problem finally solved. Her heart broke, not just from fear, but from the pain of knowing that the people who were supposed to protect her had thrown her away without a second thought. And now she was being delivered to a man known only as a monster, a man who could very well be her end. Zalira's heart felt like it had been ripped from her chest as Bakari's men led her away from Kanyama. The village she once called home grew smaller behind her, the familiar sights and sounds fading into the distance. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Looking back would only make the pain worse. Her legs felt heavy, her body weak from fear and grief, but the men didn't slow down. They marched forward, silent and unbothered by her quiet sobs. The road stretched endlessly ahead, dry and dusty, winding through hills and dense patches of trees. The sun beat down on her, but the chill in her heart made the heat feel distant. She had never felt so alone. Every step felt like a step closer to a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her mind raced with terrifying thoughts. What kind of man was Bakari really? The stories painted him as a monster, a man who thrived on fear and violence. Would he hurt her? Would he lock her away? Or worse, would he treat her like she didn't exist at all? The journey was long, and exhaustion pulled at her. The men didn't speak to her, only stopping for water when they absolutely had to. Zalira's throat was dry, her stomach empty, but the ache inside her chest was far worse than any physical hunger. She couldn't stop thinking about Nolwazi and Mbali, how easily they had given her away, like she meant nothing. It was a pain that cut deeper than any blade. As they travelled, Zalira noticed something strange. The closer they got to Bakari's village, the more the men seemed to grow restless. They didn't talk, but she could see the unease in their eyes. They glanced at each other nervously, as if afraid of what waited ahead. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from loyalty, it was something else. It was as if they were afraid of Bakari himself. When they finally reached the edge of his land, Zalira saw his home in the distance. It wasn't what she expected. She had imagined a grand, intimidating fortress, a place fit for a cruel and powerful man. Instead, it looked cold and empty. The walls were strong but worn down, the once proud banners now tattered and faded. It felt less like a home and more like a prison. And then she saw him, Bakari. He stood on the steps of his home, watching them approach. He was tall and broad-shouldered, just like the stories described. His face was sharp, his jaw strong, but his eyes weren't what she expected. They weren't filled with rage or cruelty. They were distant, clouded with something she couldn't quite understand. Pain, maybe. He looked less like a monster and more like a man who carried a weight too heavy to bear. For a moment, their eyes met. Zalira felt her heart race, but not from fear. There was something broken in his gaze, something that made her hesitate. He looked at her, not with anger, but with emptiness, as though he expected her to flinch or cry, as though he already believed she hated him. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked back inside, without so much as a greeting. The men quickly led her in after him, and as they passed through the doorway, Zalira couldn't shake the feeling that Bakari wasn't the man people said he was. He wasn't cruel, not in the way they made him sound. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to feel anything at all, and somehow that scared her even more. She didn't know why, but something inside her whispered that Bakari wasn't evil. He was hurting, and as much as she wanted to hold on to her fear, a part of her couldn't stop wondering what had broken him so badly. When Zalira stepped into Bakari's home, the air felt heavy and lifeless. The walls were made of strong stone, but the place felt hollow, like a shell of what it once was. It wasn't the grand, powerful home she expected from a man so feared. It was cold and quiet, more like a prison than a home. The servants moved silently, their eyes lowered, too afraid to look at her, or at him. Bakari barely acknowledged her. He sat slumped in a large wooden chair, his eyes dark and distant. Up close, Zalira saw him more clearly. He looked nothing like the monster she had imagined. His face was sharp and handsome, but his skin looked pale and his body thinner than it should have been. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. His eyes, once filled with power and strength, now seemed tired and haunted. It didn't take long for Zalira to realize something was terribly wrong. Bakari wasn't the strong, merciless man people whispered about. He was sick, very sick. His breaths were shallow and uneven, and his skin looked damp with sweat. She noticed how he winced every time he moved, though he tried to mask it with a cold stare. He was in constant pain, his body weak, but he refused to let anyone see it. The cruel, fearsome image he carried wasn't who he truly was. It was a mask. Bakari kept people afraid of him because fear was the only thing keeping him in control. If anyone knew how weak he really was, they would rise against him. His enemies would destroy him. He ruled with a cold heart because he believed it was the only way to survive. Zalira watched him in silence, her heart conflicted. This wasn't the ruthless monster Nolwazi had sold her to. This was a man trapped in his own suffering, wearing his cruelty like armor. But he didn't want her pity. From the moment she arrived, Bakari treated her like she was nothing. He spoke to her only when necessary, his voice sharp and hollow. He never looked her in the eyes for long, and when he did, there was a flicker of something strange, like he expected her to hate him. He pushed her away before she even had the chance to know him. He barked orders at her, told her to stay out of his way, and made it clear he didn't want her kindness. He expected her to fear him like everyone else did. In his mind, she was just another person who would look at him with disgust once she saw what he had become. But Zalira couldn't bring herself to hate him. She saw the pain he tried to hide, the weight he carried. Beneath the harsh words and cold stares, she saw something else, a man who had given up on believing anyone could care for him, and somehow that hurt more than the cruelty he showed her. Days passed in Bakari's home, each one feeling heavier than the last. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional sound of Bakari's pained coughs or groans when he thought no one could hear. Zalaira watched him quietly from a distance, her heart aching. He was a man wrapped in misery, pushing everyone away, including her. But she couldn't bring herself to hate him, not after seeing his suffering. She saw past his cold words and distant stares. She saw the way his hands trembled when he reached for his cup of water. She noticed how he barely ate, his once powerful body growing thinner and weaker by the day. He tried to hide it behind his icy demeanor, but Zalaira saw the truth. He wasn't a heartless monster. He was a man drowning in pain, and no one cared enough to pull him out. Zalaira couldn't ignore it. She didn't care how cruelly he spoke to her, or how hard he tried to make her fear him. She wasn't afraid. She felt sorry for him. And more than that, she wanted to help him. She started small. She would wake before dawn, quietly moving around the house to cook meals for him, even when he refused to eat. She made sure the food was warm and comforting, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd take a bite. And when he didn't, she tried again the next day, refusing to give up. When his coughing fits left him too weak to move, she brought him water and sat by his side. He never thanked her. Sometimes he wouldn't even look at her, but she didn't mind. She wasn't doing it for gratitude. She did it because she couldn't stand to see him suffer alone. At night, when his groans echoed through the halls, Zalaira would quietly slip into his room, wet a cloth, and press it gently to his burning forehead. Bakari would stir, his eyes half opening to see her face. He never said a word, but in those moments, Zalaira saw something different in his eyes. The coldness wasn't there anymore, just exhaustion and confusion, as if he didn't understand why she was still there. She spoke to him too, not about his pain or his past, but about the village, the stars, the warm breeze that carried the smell of wildflowers in Kanyama. She told him stories from her childhood, about her father's laugh and the dreams she held onto, even when life was cruel. She spoke softly, her voice a gentle comfort in the dark, even when she wasn't sure he was listening. And slowly, something began to change. Bakari stopped snapping at her. He still didn't speak much, but his eyes lingered on her a little longer when she entered the room. He no longer turned away when she brought him food, and though he didn't say it, she noticed he ate more than before. When his coughing left him gasping for air, he no longer waved her away. He let her stay. For the first time in years, Bakari felt warmth. It was unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. This feeling of someone caring for him without expecting anything in return. He didn't know how to handle it. People had always feared him, hated him, or used him. But Zalaira was different. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't angry. She wasn't waiting for something. She just cared. A part of him wanted to push her away again, to remind her of who he was and why she should hate him like everyone else. But another part, buried deep under years of bitterness and pain, didn't want her to leave. He didn't deserve her kindness. He knew that, but for the first time, he couldn't stop himself from wanting it. Bakari's condition grew worse with each passing day. His once powerful frame now seemed like a shadow of what it used to be. His skin was pale, his eyes dull and hollow. He spent more time in bed, his body too weak to move, his breaths shallow and strained. Each cough rattled through him like it might be his last. And yet, Zalaira never left his side. She was there every morning, carefully helping him sit up so he could sip water. She stayed through the long afternoons, cooling his fevered forehead and whispering soft words to ease his pain. And at night, when the darkness wrapped around them and his body trembled with weakness, she sat by his bed, holding his hand until sleep finally took him. She never complained. She never looked at him with pity or fear, only warmth and quiet determination. Bakari didn't understand it. He couldn't. Why would she stay? He had been nothing but cruel to her. He was the reason she was taken from her home, sold like an object. She should hate him. Yet, here she was, wiping sweat from his brow, singing softly to him when his nightmares made him toss and turn. For so long, Bakari had believed he didn't deserve kindness, let alone love. He had built his life around fear and power, thinking it was the only way to survive. But Zalaira's kindness didn't ask for anything in return. It wasn't something he could control or push away. It was just there, constant, unwavering and warm, and without realizing it, Bakari began to change. The anger that had once fueled him started to fade. He stopped speaking to her with cold, sharp words. His voice softened, and though it was weak, it held something different now, something gentle. He began to wait for her visits, his heart lifting when he heard her soft footsteps outside his room. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, memorizing the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams, or the way she smiled when she thought he was asleep. Bakari, the feared, ruthless man from the distant village, was falling in love. It terrified him. He didn't know how to love, not after years of shutting his heart away. He didn't believe he deserved her heart, but he couldn't stop his own from beating faster every time she touched his hand or whispered his name. Zalara saw the change in him too. He wasn't the monster the world believed he was. He wasn't cruel, not truly. He was broken, lonely, and hurting. But beneath it all, he was a man capable of kindness and warmth. She saw the way his eyes softened when he looked at her now, the way his voice trembled, not with anger, but with something else, something that made her heart race too. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. He was the man who had bought her, the man everyone feared. But the more she stayed by his side, the more she realized she wasn't afraid of him. She admired his strength, his resilience, and the quiet vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. She didn't see a ruthless monster anymore. She saw Bakari, the man beneath the walls he built. Neither of them spoke about the feelings growing between them. They didn't need to. It was in the way Zalara held his hand a little longer each night. It was in the way Bakari's eyes lingered on her, even when his body was too weak to move. It was in the unspoken comfort they found in each other. Bakari, who once believed love was something he would never feel again, now found himself holding on to it desperately, afraid that if he let go, it might disappear forever. And Zalara, the girl who was supposed to hate him, found herself loving the man no one else ever tried to understand. Bakari's health, which had seemed to hold on by a thread, suddenly spiraled downward. His skin, once pale, now looked almost grey. His body, already thin, seemed to wither more each day. His breaths became shallow and laboured, and his once strong voice had turned into a weak, raspy whisper. The man who once struck fear into entire villages now lay powerless, barely able to keep his eyes open. Zalara's heart shattered with every moment she watched him slip further away. No matter how hard she tried, feeding him, nursing him, comforting him, nothing seemed to help anymore. His fever burned hotter, his body trembled more violently, and his eyes stopped focusing on her. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling in his sleep, his hands sometimes reaching out as though searching for something he couldn't find. Zalara refused to let him die. She couldn't, not after everything they'd been through, not after she'd come to love him. Desperation fueled her, pushing her past exhaustion. She left Bakari's side for the first time in days, running through the village to find help. She remembered hearing whispers about an old healer who lived on the edge of a neighbouring village, a man named Jabari, known for his wisdom and knowledge of curses and forgotten magic. Without a second thought, Zalara set off, her heart pounding in her chest. She ran through the dusty roads and thorned bushes, her feet bleeding and her breath short, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. When she finally found Jabari's small hut, the old man looked at her with knowing eyes, as though he had been expecting her. His face was weathered and wrinkled, his back hunched with age, but his eyes held the sharpness of a man who saw more than most. He listened quietly as Zalara begged him to save Bakari, her voice breaking with fear and exhaustion. Jabari studied her for a long moment before speaking. His voice was low and steady, filled with a kind of sadness. He told Zalara that Bakari's illness wasn't natural. It was the result of a powerful curse, a curse placed by someone close to him, someone who wanted to see him suffer. The sickness wasn't meant to kill him quickly, but to slowly strip him of his strength, his will, and his life, leaving him to die alone and hated. Zalara's stomach twisted. Who could hate him enough to do this? Jabari explained that the only way to break the curse wasn't through medicine or magic. The curse was tied to Bakari's heart, feeding on his pain, loneliness, and belief that he was unworthy of love. The only way to destroy it was for Bakari to find true love, love that was pure, selfless, and unwavering. But that wasn't enough. The love had to be declared openly and fearlessly for the world to hear. Only then would the curse lose its power to release him. Zalaira's heart raced. She knew, without a doubt, that she loved Bakari. She loved him more than she ever thought possible. But would it be enough? Would he even believe her if he was still conscious enough to hear her? And could she bring herself to say those words aloud, knowing he might never say them back? None of that mattered, and all that mattered was saving. Without wasting another second, Zalaira thanked Jabari and ran back to Bakari's home. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. She pushed forward, fueled by the image of him lying helpless and broken. She refused to let him die without knowing he was loved. He deserved that much, even if he didn't believe it himself. He lay on his bed, his body still and cold, his breath so faint they barely stirred the air. His once fierce eyes, the ones that could make entire villages tremble, were now half-lidded and distant, as if he was already standing on the edge of life and death. Beside him, a gentle hand held his tightly, refusing to let go. Her heart felt like it was being ripped apart, piece by piece, watching the man she loved fade away. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to cry. She had to be strong. She couldn't let him see her break. She whispered softly, hoping he'd hear, hoping he'd stay just a little longer. A faint stir broke the silence, his head turning slowly. His voice came out broken and strained, barely more than a whisper. "I never wanted this for you," he rasped, his voice trembling. "You were supposed to hate me. I thought it would be easier that way, but you stayed. You cared, even when I didn't deserve it." His chest rose and fell in shaky, uneven breaths. "I need you to know. I love you. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Her heart shattered. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled down her cheek, falling onto his hand. She shook her head desperately, her voice breaking. "No, don't say goodbye. Don't do this. I love you too. I love you more than anything. I don't care about your past or what you've done. You're not the monster people think you are. You're kind and brave, and you've been hurt for so long, but you're not alone anymore. You have me. I love you. I'll always love you." The words came out in a flood, raw and full of emotion. It didn't matter who heard. It didn't matter that the world saw him as a ruthless, broken man. All that mattered was him, the man who, despite everything, had opened his heart, the man she couldn't imagine living without. Eyes widened slightly, his lips parting as though her words had reached a part of him he thought was long dead. A tear slipped from the corner of his eye, and his hand weakly squeezed hers. For a moment, he didn't look like the feared warrior or the cold, distant man he had once been. He looked like a man who had finally found peace. His voice trembled one last time. "You saved me, even if I die. Loving you was the only good thing I ever did." She shook her head again, her sobs coming harder now. "Number, you're not going to die. Stay with me, please. Stay with me." His eyes slowly closed, his body falling still. Her heart stopped, panic crashing over her like a wave. She clung to him, her face pressed to his chest, sobbing into him. "Don't leave me. I love you." Nothing else mattered anymore. The past, the pain, the mistakes, none of it mattered. Love was the only thing that remained, and nothing could take that away. The curse was lifted one bright morning when the man once feared and reviled began to awaken with a vigor no one had ever seen before. His body, once weakened and pale from the relentless grip of the dark magic, now pulsed with life and strength. The harsh lines of cruelty that had once marred his face softened into gentle curves, revealing kind eyes that shone with unexpected warmth. In that single moment, the village of Kanyama, which had long been haunted by rumors and whispered fears about his past, was stunned into silence. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, a living testament to the healing power of love and compassion. When he stepped out from the cold confines of his former existence, his presence spoke of redemption and hope. The remnants of the curse completely washed away. The people who had once trembled at the mention of his name now looked on in awe as a new man emerged from the shadows of his tortured history, a man who embodied kindness and a genuine desire to mend the brokenness of his past. In the days that followed, accompanied by the woman who had shown him unconditional care, he journeyed back to Kanyama. The path to the village seemed to glow under the soft morning light, symbolizing the promise of fresh beginning. Each step taken was a quiet defiance of the cruelty that had once ruled his life, a clear statement that love had overcome bitterness. When they reached the familiar dirt roads and colorful market stalls of his homeland, the villagers gathered in hushed clusters, their eyes wide with disbelief, their hearts, once filled with fear and prejudice, now fluttered with tentative hope at the sight of this transformed soul. In a moment of profound reckoning, he confronted those who had played a part in his dark past. The confrontation was not marked by anger or harsh words, but by a quiet, determined resolve to reclaim dignity for both himself and the woman who had stood by him through his suffering. The figures responsible for his earlier torment, those who had once seen him as nothing more than a tool to be used, now found themselves powerless in the face of this newfound strength. The man before them no longer bore the cold, ruthless expression they had once known. Instead, his voice was gentle yet firm, as he demanded that the dignity of the woman he loved be respected. In that charged atmosphere, every whispered conversation and sidelong glance bore witness to a pivotal transformation, the vanishing of cruelty and the emergence of sincere remorse and humility from those who had once thrived on power and fear. As time passed, the love between the two only deepened, weaving itself into the very fabric of the community. Their days became filled with simple acts of kindness, a shared meal under the shade of a baobab tree, soft laughter echoing in the cool evening air, and quiet moments of reflection on how even the hardest hearts could be healed by genuine affection. Their journey of recovery, both personal and communal, slowly mended the wounds that had long divided the village. Neighbors began to greet them with smiles instead of wary glances, and the once fractured bonds of the community started to knit together in unexpected ways. The story of their transformation spread like wildfire, inspiring others to believe in second chances and the transformative power of love. In the end, their shared life became a vibrant tapestry of renewed hope and endless possibility. Every sunrise brought with it a reminder that even the darkest curses could be broken, and every gentle touch was a reaffirmation that compassion could melt the coldest of hearts. Their new beginning was not just about reclaiming what had once been lost, it was about forging an entirely new future where love, respect, and understanding reigned supreme. The legacy of their love story proved to everyone in Kanyama that the human heart, no matter how scarred by the past, had the incredible capacity to heal and to flourish when nurtured with kindness.